The slap wasn't just a sound, it was a verdict, delivered in public, and for 8 long seconds, every shopper froze, as if the truth itself had been caught on camera and had nowhere left to hide. The camera shakes in someone's hand. A palm-shaped flare blooms across a black woman's cheek. A white boss, jaw set, tie perfect, shouts something about "my store," as if ownership can be claimed by volume. 2 officers hover near the entrance, uncertain, performative, ready to be used like props. You've seen scenes like this, clips cut into outrage for 24 hours and then buried under the algorithm's next wave. But this one isn't a clip. It's a key. Turn it, and a locked door opens, not just to one confrontation, but to the structure that built it. Incentives that reward suspicion. Policies that perform fairness while practicing exclusion, and a culture trained to mistake confidence for innocence. The woman in the hoodie does not raise her voice. She squares her shoulders and says the 2 words that rearrange the room. "Your store?" The question is a scalpel. Everyone who hears it, customers, staff, security, feels the slice, because beneath it are unspoken rules. Who is seen? Who is sold to, who is believed, who is punished. Those rules didn't start at this counter. They were imported, brick by brick, from boardrooms, from hiring filters that say culture fit and mean not you, from training decks that over-index on loss prevention and under-train on dignity, from neighborhood maps colored by old fears with new names. This story is based on real patterns stitched across America's retail floors, corporate lobbies, school offices, and suburban sidewalks. The sudden escalation when suspicion meets skin. The policy that expands or contracts depending on who is asking. The performance of safety where only status is protected. If you've never felt those rules pressing due on your shoulders, that is part of the design. If you have, you already know this is not an outlier. It is an operating system. Watch the boss's face. Watch the confidence calcify. He doesn't see a founder, a CEO, a woman who built what he temporarily manages. He sees a proxy for everything he was taught to control. The confidence isn't born in a day. It's cultivated by metrics misread as merit, by a chain of emails where complaints about profiling are marked handled because a courtesy call was made. It's grown by the normalization of phrases like read the customer and protect the brand, which often translate to rank people by how much you think they're worth. Here's the hidden part most people never get to see: how prejudice is operationalized. It's not just slurs and slaps. It's the spreadsheet that tags certain zip codes as loss-prone and assigns extra security to stores there. It's the unspoken quota of high-value customers who receive smiles before they spend $1. It's the meeting where someone brings up bias training and the budget line is cut because we're tight this quarter, but there's money for another glossy ad campaign showing happy, diverse models in a world that stops at the photo shoot. The woman's calm is not submission. It is strategy honed by survival. She has rehearsed this. The pause that lets the room reveal itself, the measured question that forces the mask to slip. Her silence is a mirror, and in it the boss sees the worst version of himself, so he doubles down. That too is part of the system. When power is challenged by dignity, it often chooses escalation over accountability. ID, verification, call the bank. Not because fraud has been detected, but because humiliation has been weaponized to make people leave quietly. But look away from the boss for a moment and find the minor characters, the ones who decide whether justice becomes policy or story, the assistant manager who knows better but fears the rent, the young associate who believes service should mean service for everyone, the security guard who has been trained to see risk in hoodies, not in hubris. They are not villains. They are pressure points. Systems survive by making good people complicit through incentives and fear. Systems change when ordinary courage breaks that script. Here's a truth. The algorithm would rather you scroll past. Racism has an accounting department. It balances humiliation against profit and tells the frontline worker that efficiency requires suspicion. It tallies who gets to browse without eyes on their back, who is ushered to the premium counter, who is asked for 3 forms of ID, who is asked for none. It calculates which complaints can be softened with coupons, which can be ignored, and which must be silenced with NDAs. And because numbers wear suits, the decisions look neutral while they reproduce the same harm. So when the woman says, "Your store," she is not only correcting a man, she is indicting a machine. She is calling out the false math that confuses possession with power, confidence with competence, whiteness with authority. The room hears it, even if they don't yet understand. Phones rise, red lights blink, and suddenly the private theater of everyday prejudice becomes public record. That is the other thing systems fear: evidence. Because evidence invites witnesses, and witnesses invite accountability. We will peel back these layers: how policies become weapons, how fear becomes management, how stories like this travel from a single aisle to national headlines. We will name the hidden agendas that keep it all humming: the marketing of exclusivity as a dog whistle, the algorithmic risk scores that inherit yesterday's bias and call it tomorrow's objectivity, the psychological toll extracted from communities asked to swallow indignities and smile. If this feels dangerous, good. Dangerous knowledge is the only kind that interrupts a comfortable lie. You're about to hear the parts you were never supposed to hear. The email threads, the whispered instructions, the rationalizations that sound reasonable until you place them next to a handprint on a cheek. You will meet people who made choices and people who had choices made for them. You will see how consequences ripple through a store, through a company, through a city, and you will understand why a single moment can be both a spark and a mirror, both a reckoning and a route map. Stay with me, not because outrage is trendy, but because the truth, carefully told, can be a tool. We are going to use it like one. We will follow the woman's story, yes, but also what made her courage necessary. We will track the boss's fall, yes, but also the ladders that lifted him without testing the weight of his character. We will listen to the bystanders at the edge of the frame and ask why so many of us learn to hold the camera instead of the line. And when we are finished, you will not look at your store or my store the same way again. You will see who is written into the rules and who is written out. Before the slap, the store already knew who was welcome, because the city it sat in had been taught for generations to whisper who belongs and who should be watched. Think about the blueprints beneath the marble floor. Not the electrical schematics, but the social wiring that carried old biases into a bright, modern showroom. Long before a manager learned to read customers by their clothes, bankers learned to read neighborhoods by their color. Whole districts were drawn in red and starved of loans. And when opportunity finally arrived decades later, it came with a memory. Where investment flows, dignity often follows, and where it doesn't, suspicion takes root. The store simply imported those maps into policy with new names: risk profiles, loss prevention zones, PRAF, red demographics. That's how a woman in a hoodie becomes a category before she becomes a customer. Watch how the machine trains itself. A complaint comes in about profiling. Corporate answers with a webinar and a checkbox. The next quarter's goal arrives. Shrinkage must drop by 2%. There is no line item for how to protect dignity. So frontline workers do the math they've been taught to do by the nightly news and the neighborhood rumor mill. More eyes on certain bodies, more questions for certain faces, more friction at the register where there should be service. The machine rewards what it measures, and it measures the wrong things. Meanwhile, the woman in the hoodie carries a different kind of accounting. The cost of hyper-visibility and invisibility at the same time. Hyper-visible to security, invisible to service. She knows the choreography. Don't touch merchandise too quickly. Narrate your movements. I'm just looking at this model. Keep your hands out of your pockets. Smile without inviting. These rules are not on the walls, but everyone who needs to knows them. The psychological tax is quiet but compounding. Your pulse learns to speed up when the anti-theft gates chirp. Even when you've bought nothing, your shoulders learn to tense when a question starts with, "Ma'am, can I see?" Your mind rehearses exit plans you never should have to script. And then there's the boss, the man who thinks he is protecting the brand by protecting his reflection. He was not born with that certainty. It was issued to him at orientation alongside a lanyard and a password. Know your guests, the handbook says. Trust your instincts, the manager training adds. But whose instincts? Formed by which stories? He believes he is good because he is effective. He hits targets because he has learned where to aim his doubt. He doesn't think of it as race. He thinks of it as fit. He doesn't think of it as exclusion. He thinks of it as prioritizing. He has a justification for every cut he makes until a camera records the wound. Let's go back to the moments before phones rose and truth escaped its cage. The assistant manager, Jennifer, was at the register, scanning a return for a customer who wore status-like armor. She noticed the look, the same one she'd seen dozens of times, cross David's face when the hoodie woman asked about the premium phones. She heard the tone shift, the syllables sharpen. She told herself the familiar story. Don't make this your problem. You need this job. That too is systemic. Build a world where telling the truth endangers your rent, and watch how silence becomes a survival skill. When silence scales, injustice scales with it. Marcus saw it differently. He had been on the wrong side of assumptions enough times to recognize the opening beats of a bad song. He took 2 steps toward the woman, then stopped when David's hand went up, not a slap yet, but a warning in the air, a stop sign made of flesh and authority. Real customers, David said. The phrase lands like a bruise, real, as in valuable, real, as in visible to the people who can write your schedule and end your shift. Marcus's training told him to retreat. His conscience told him the opposite. Conscience rarely wins in retail because conscience cannot print a badge or approve overtime. But on this day, it held its ground. Here's a hidden agenda no consultant's deck will admit. Exclusivity sells. Premium experience is marketed as magic, but often practiced as gatekeeping. The velvet rope is psychological. It lives in glances and in the speed at which an associate approaches your aisle. High-end brands hire client advisors, and somewhere in the onboarding, a poisonous whisper is passed along. Protect the aura. Protect the room. That whisper becomes policy without ever becoming words. You see it when a black teenager touching a display is told, "We just cleaned that," while a white teenager is told, "That one's our newest mo." You see it when browsing is welcomed as culture for some and treated as suspicion for others. The numbers help the machine hide. "We stop everyone," a store might say, waving at a spreadsheet of ID checks. But look closer. Who gets stopped when there's a line behind them? When embarrassment has an audience? Who is asked to wait while a manager calls the bank to verify a card that would swipe without question in another hand? Who is thanked by name and who is reduced to sir or ma'am with a stiffness that says, "I'm protecting myself from you"? Equal forms can deliver unequal outcomes. That's the magic trick of institutional manipulation. Neutral words do discriminatory work with a smile. This is why the woman's calm is so dangerous to the system. It refuses to play the role that justifies the response. Rage would have let David call security and write "disruptive customer" in his end-of-day log. Tears would have been filed under sensitive incident, handled. Instead, she asks for the owner, which sounds like an appeal but is really an audit. It pulls rank without revealing rank. It forces the hierarchy to show itself. How quickly does help arrive? And for whom? How does power move when power thinks no one is watching? The question cracks the ceiling, and through that crack, the sky begins to show. Outside the store, the city keeps moving. Buses exhale, cyclists weave, office workers tap badges and climb escalators into glass. The scene at the counter is not an exception to that rhythm. It is its echo. In office towers, resumes with ethnic names still receive fewer callbacks than identical ones with neutral names. In hospitals, pain reports voiced by Black patients still receive fewer prescriptions from the same physicians who swear an oath to do no harm. In classrooms, discipline falls harder on some bodies than others for the same behaviors. So, of course, in a store, the most American stage we have, bias appears dressed as policy, as professionalism, as just doing my job. What happened here is not only about a slap, it is about the preparation for that slap, the years of practice that made it thinkable. It is about the belief that humiliation can be administered like a security measure and cleaned up like a spill. It is about the confidence that no one important will be harmed by your prejudice, because the people you harm are not important. That belief dies loudly only when it misidentifies who matters. But even when it guesses correctly, it still kills softly. Another person leaves a store carrying nothing but a reminder that the world does not expect to serve them. The cameras rise. The boss barks orders that sound like rules and feel like insults. The woman's phone rings, and the room suddenly has a new center of gravity. Power is coming. Not the kind with badges and belts, but the kind with signatures and budgets. Notice the reactions. Guilt travels down, fear travels sideways, arrogance travels up until it hits the ceiling and spills back as panic. The exit door becomes a future. The customers become a jury. The associate who spoke up becomes a risk and a possibility at the same time. If you've never had to weigh every step you take in a store, that too is a form of privilege. The privilege to move unconsciously. For everyone else, this is not content. It's muscle memory. The purpose of telling this story is not to produce a satisfying twist where a manager is unmasked and punished, though that twist is coming. The purpose is to expose the plumbing, the pipes that carry old toxins through new buildings, the valves labeled policy that open wider for some than others, the meters that count profit but not pain. Repair work starts with a map. This section is your map. So when the executives push through the revolving door and look past the polished suit to the person with the handprint on her cheek, something larger than a job is on T. Real. An organization is deciding whether it believes its own values in practice or just in print. A public is deciding whether to keep shopping or start asking questions. And a country is being offered, one more time, a simple mirror. This is who we train ourselves to be when we think we're only selling phones. Justice, when it arrives, will look like accountability. But transformation looks like different incentives, different training, different instincts. It looks like a company choosing to measure dignity with the same obsession it measures revenue. It looks like a manager being taught that protecting the brand means protecting the people who walk through the door, not protecting his pride. It looks like a young associate who told the truth being promoted not as a PR gesture, but because courage is a qualification. We are not there yet. But the door is open and the cameras are rolling. The machine has been named. The next choice, yours, mine, theirs, is whether to keep it humming or take it apart. The moment of silence after a public humiliation is not empty. It is crowded with decisions, with fears, with calculations about who will speak and who will stay silent. The store is suspended in that silence, like a stage between acts. Customers exchange glances but rarely words. Phones keep recording because recording is safer than intervening. Employees stand stiffly, caught between their conscience and their paycheck. And in that suspended moment, every person present reveals something about the system they live in. That racism survives not because one man yells or slaps, but because many others choose quiet over consequence. Look closer. Jennifer, the assistant manager, presses her lips together so hard they turn white. She has watched months of subtle digs, coded remarks, profiling disguised as business sense. She knows the script. Managers are praised for keeping the store efficient, for weeding out time wasters, for maximizing sales by focusing on quality clientele. She knows exactly what those phrases mean in practice. She also knows her daughter's asthma medicine costs more each month than she makes in a week. The rent notice tucked into her purse at home has the word "final" stamped in red. Morality in this calculus feels like a luxury she cannot afford, so she stands still, watching harm and swallowing herself. Now Marcus, young, restless, proud, but already bruised by years of small humiliations, he's learned to cover with a smile. He feels the injustice burning through him like a fever. Every class he's taken in business school told him that customer service is about experience, not judgment. Every professor who praised his essays on ethical management would tell him this moment is his test. But here, in this fluorescent-lit store, theory collides with power. He takes a half step forward, his throat dry, his heart pounding. He knows that if he speaks, he may lose the little income that keeps him in college. Yet he also knows that if he stays silent, he becomes like the rest, an accessory to cruelty. And then there are the customers. Sarah, the businesswoman in the tailored suit, considers her options. A purchase worth thousands of dollars, or a principal worth more. Her silence feels heavy too, but she is calculating her own balance sheet. What does it mean to walk out in protest? Will it matter? Will anyone notice? Nearby, an elderly couple watches with dismay. They have seen this before. Different decades, different uniforms, same prejudice dressed in new words. They whisper to each other, not loudly enough to disrupt the store's script, but just enough to remind themselves that they are not complicit. Yet their whispers will not protect the woman with the handprint on her cheek. Systems thrive in these silences. The truth is that most discrimination never goes viral, never gets captured, never reaches a boardroom or a trending hashtag. Most of it ends here, in these uses where ordinary people convince themselves that it's not my place, or someone else will say something. These are the hidden gears that keep prejudice grinding. Fear of losing jobs, fear of confrontation, fear of stepping outside the role society has written for you. And in America, those roles are deeply rehearsed. Managers enforce, employees comply, customers consume, and the marginalized absorb the blow. But silence is not neutral. It is an accelerant. Each person who watches and says nothing adds another brick to the wall that shields the oppressor. That's why systemic discrimination feels so immovable. It is built not only on the loud acts of the few, but on the quiet complicity of the many. A slap is visible. The silence after is harder to notice, but it is what allows the slap to repeat itself in store after store, city after city. The woman in the hoodie understands this. She doesn't beg for help, because she knows help rarely arrives when dignity alone is wounded. She doesn't shout because rage would only confirm the stereotype David already believes. Instead, she waits, and in that waiting, she forces the silence to speak. Every recording phone, every tight-lipped witness, every trembling employee is now part of the record. The silence that once protected the oppressor now begins to indict the bystanders. This is where psychology reveals its scars. For communities that live with racism daily, silence is both shield and shackle. Shield, because speaking up can cost you your freedom, your job, even your life. Shackle, because every time you stay silent, the weight grows heavier, pressing into your self-worth until you begin to wonder whether the world is right about you after all. That is how racism breaks more than bones. It breaks confidence, dreams, ambition. It whispers that you do not belong, and it recruits your silence to help prove the lie. And for those who benefit from the system, silence is a narcotic. It dulls the sting of complicity. It tells you that you are not part of the harm because you did not swing the hand. You only stood nearby. It tells you that your responsibility ends at your own skin. But deep down, in the nervous glance you exchange with another bystander, in the tightness in your throat as you turn away, you know. And that knowing, unspoken, becomes another layer in the system's armor. Now imagine what it does to the soul of a child watching their parent humiliated this way. Imagine the daughter who asks, "Why didn't anyone help?" and the parent who has no answer except to hold her hand tighter and hope she forgets. Imagine the son who learns, from one afternoon in a store, that no matter how hard he studies or how well he dresses, someone can still decide he is a thief. These are not isolated traumas. They are lessons, taught young, reinforced often, that shape how entire communities move through the world. And each lesson takes something away: trust in strangers, confidence in fairness, belief in safety. That is why moments like these matter so much. They are not just about a slap or a shout. They are about the architecture of silence that surrounds it. They are about how fear, profit, and convenience keep mouths closed while injustice grows roots. They are about the heavy cost of choosing survival over truth, and the even heavier cost of passing that lesson down to the next generation. The silence will not last long. The door is about to open, and authority is about to walk in wearing suits instead of uniforms. But never forget what happened in this pause, because every pause like this is a vote, for the system to continue or for it to crack. And too often, America has voted for the former. The woman in the hoodie is about to show us what it looks like when someone refuses to let silence be the final word. When authority finally enters the room, it rarely looks like justice at first. It looks like more hierarchy, more polished shoes, more people who decide whether your pain counts. The doors swing open, the air shifts. Two executives stride in, their expressions sharp with urgency, their suits tailored to speak before their mouths do. Behind them, the head of security, shoulders broad, walks steady, moves as if he has already decided whose side he is on. For David, the manager who moments ago felt invincible, this is reassurance. In his mind, power always protects power, but his confidence begins to crack when those eyes, serious, searching, unflinching, do not land on him. They land on the woman in the hoodie, the one he dismissed as a nuisance, then branded a thief, then struck across the face. The silence thickens, then breaks with a title that should have redefined the room from the start: Miss Williams. Spoken not with pity or condescension, but with recognition. Respect where David offered disdain. Authority where he assumed anonymity. In that moment, the fiction collapses. The hoodie was never the truth. The assumptions were never protection, and the man who believed he owned the space is suddenly revealed as an intruder in the empire someone else built. This is the mask ripped off systemic racism. The way it mistakes appearance for value, arrogance for leadership, exclusion for professionalism. David is not an anomaly. He is a product, a polished graduate of a culture that tells men like him they are natural gatekeepers of quality. He is the kind of manager who receives praise for maintaining brand integrity, when in reality he has been maintaining prejudice with a smile. And when caught, his instinct is not apology, but excuse. "I didn't know. Look how she's dressed." That phrase, "look how she's dressed," is more than a deflection. It is the skeleton key to centuries of rationalization. Slave owners once wrote laws about who could wear what fabrics, who could walk in what neighborhoods, who could even learn to read. Later, sharecroppers were policed not just in labor but in attire, expected to look humble so they would not appear to overstep. In the 20th century, black professionals were too old to wear suits to be taken seriously, while white peers could show up in casual wear and still command respect. Clothing has always been weaponized as evidence for worth or for suspicion, depending on who wears it. So when David insists that the hoodie tricked him, he is reaching for an ancient script, blaming the uniform, not the prejudice. But the truth has already outpaced him. Customers film, executives listen, and the internet waits like dry grass for a spark. His words are not just pathetic, they are archival, another entry in the long history of excuses people make when caught demeaning those they were trained to control. Meanwhile, the psychological gravity shifts for everyone else in the store. Marcus, the young associate who dared to defend a stranger, realizes he wasn't standing next to a customer. He was standing next to the CEO. His risk, once foolish in the eyes of power, now becomes prophetic. Jennifer, the assistant manager, feels the nausea of recognition. Every moment she stayed silent is now a liability, a weight on her conscience and perhaps her career. Even the security guard, who shadowed Samantha as though she were suspicious, sees the hierarchy invert. His gaze, once trained to watch her, is now forced to watch himself. Here lies the hidden truth about institutional manipulation. It does not just damage the targets of discrimination. It corrodes everyone who enforces it. The guard learns suspicion more than service. The assistant learns fear more than fairness. The manager learns arrogance more than leadership. And by the time the mask slips, by the time the CEO reveals her name, all of them are implicated. Not because they all struck the blow, but because they rehearsed their roles in silence until the slap became inevitable. And what of the customers? Their phones keep rolling, but now their voices rise too. Unbelievable. She's the owned. I knew something was wrong. Here is the paradox of public racism. Many will not intervene, but all will bear witness once power changes sides. They clap when the villain is escorted out, but they had no words when the victim was humiliated. It is easier to cheer justice than to risk becoming its instrument. That is why systemic change requires more than exposure. It requires transformation of instinct. Who will we be in the silence before authority arrives? The executives nod at Samantha, waiting for her signal, and she delivers it not with rage but with clarity. I own this store. You just assaulted me. Her words hit harder than the slap because they reveal what racism always tries to hide. That worth is not dictated by surface, that wealth does not guarantee respect, that dignity can be stripped in public even from someone who has climbed every ladder society said she could not. If the CEO of the company can be treated like a thief in her own store, what chance does the single mother have? The teenager with $20 in his pocket? The elderly man buying a gift on a fixed income? This is the mirror racism holds up to America. If power cannot shield you, nothing will. And yet, here comes the flip. Justice, swift and undeniable, delivered not because the system is fair, but because the system was embarrassed. Cameras force corporations to act faster than conscience ever did. Viral outrage moves executives where moral arguments failed. Accountability arrives not because leadership suddenly understood dignity, but because reputation was on fire. This, too, is a dangerous truth. Sometimes the system only corrects itself when it fears profit loss more than it fears perpetuating harm. So the manager is fired, humiliated, escorted out with cameras capturing every faltering step. The internet will soon feast. But if we stop here, at the schadenfreude of downfall, we miss the larger lesson. Because the real story is not about one man losing a job. It is about how many systems built him, praised him, and sheltered him, read him until the day his arrogance collided with power he did not recognize. His fall is not the end of racism. It is evidence of its endurance. The applause in the store, the sighs of relief, the celebration online, these are cathartic but temporary. The deeper question remains, how many more managers are out there, unrecorded, unchallenged, enforcing the same prejudices on people without titles to shield them? How many more silences will be filled with humiliation instead of resistance? How many more times will justice come only when the victim is revealed to be someone important, leaving the rest invisible? This is why we must peel another layer back, because behind the slap, behind the hoodie, behind the viral video, there is something older and more dangerous, a structure that turns dignity into a privilege, fairness into a reward, and racism into routine. To dismantle it, we must stop confusing individual punishment with systemic repair. One man's firing cannot fix a culture that built 1,000 more just like him. The cameras are still rolling, but the real story has only begun. Racism doesn't just humiliate, it teaches, conditions, and rewires the way people see themselves and others until inequality feels natural, even inevitable. After David's collapse, the store is left with fragments, customers whispering, employees blinking in disbelief, Samantha steady in the center like an anchor. But what happened in that room was bigger than a slap or a firing. It was a glimpse into how prejudice seeps into the psyche, reshaping both victim and bystander until the injustice becomes self-perpetuating. This is the layer few want to talk about, because it reveals how racism is not just an external act, it becomes an internal wound. Consider the young boy standing outside the store with his mother, clutching her hand as she explains why they must leave quickly. He saw the slap. He saw people record it, laugh nervously, or look away. He heard the boss call the woman a thief, even though she bought nothing, stole nothing, wanted nothing but service. That boy will replay this memory every time he enters a store for years to come. He will tug at his hoodie, adjust his voice, over-explain himself to cashiers, not because he is guilty, but because humiliation has taught him to preempt suspicion. This is how racism colonizes the mind, not through laws alone, but through rehearsed self-policing passed down like a grim inheritance. For Samantha, the CEO, the slap is not her first. Not physically, her success shielded her from that, but symbolically. She has been slapped by underestimation at every stage. The professor who assumed her business plan was unrealistic, the bank officer who denied her first loan, the investor who said, "We don't usually fund people like you." Each was a strike across the face of her ambition. Each one forced her to either break or build resilience. And resilience, though admirable, is a double-edged blade. It keeps you moving, but it leaves scars invisible to the world. What does it do to a person to be strong every single day in the face of suspicion? What toll does that endurance exact? Now look at Jennifer, the assistant manager. For months she silenced her conscience because survival demanded it. But silence corrodes the soul. Every night she went home knowing she had watched a customer walk out humiliated, and every morning she put the uniform back on. That contradiction eats at a person. It whispers that you are powerless, when in reality you've been convinced to believe it. Racism thrives on this manipulation, keeping the oppressed doubting their worth, and the complicit doubting their voice. The result? A cycle of paralysis where nothing changes because everyone believes they can't afford to change it. Marcus's story reveals another side, courage under pressure. When he spoke up, he knew what could happen, and it did. He was fired, but in that firing came something he never expected: recognition, respect, restoration. His courage proved that silence isn't inevitable, that even in the smallest role, a voice can rupture the script. Yet here lies the cruel irony. Marcus's reward came not because he spoke, but because his words were heard by someone powerful. If Samantha had truly been just another customer, his courage would have cost him everything. This is the danger of conditional justice. It teaches young men like Marcus that morality is only safe when luck places power beside you. This psychological conditioning stretches far beyond one store. It explains why black shoppers in America often feel a chill when entering upscale spaces, why countless parents give their children the talk about how to act when stopped, questioned, or simply existing in the wrong place. It explains why surveys show that people of color carry higher levels of stress hormones, the body physically reacting to the expectation of bias. Racism is not just external harm. It is internalized hypervigilance, a nervous system trained to survive a hostile environment. And then, the other side, those who benefit. David believed his confidence was competence. He believed that belittling some customers was leadership. He believed that his judgments were instincts. Those beliefs did not come from nowhere. They were reinforced by years of praise, unchecked power, and a system that rewarded prejudice disguised as efficiency. This is the psychological comfort of racism for those in power. It tells them they are not cruel, they are correct. It tells them their biases are simply standards. It lets them feel righteous while inflicting harm. That comfort is as addictive as it is destructive, and it produces more Davids than we care to admit. The most devastating manipulation of all is how racism convinces entire societies that its outcomes are natural. When a black CEO is mistaken for a thief, the public shrugs. Mistakes happen. When entire neighborhoods are underserved, the explanation is, that's just economics. When a child grows up believing they must dress a certain way to be respected, people say, that's just how the world works. Each shrug cements the lie that prejudice is inevitable. But inevitability is the system's most dangerous disguise. It makes injustice look like gravity, when in truth it is scaffolding, designed and maintained by human choices. And so the question lingers, what do we do with the damage already inflicted? Samantha's cheek will heal, but the boy outside, the employees inside, the countless people who see themselves in this story, they carry the scar tissue in their hearts. Healing begins with naming the wound. Healing begins when a society stops pretending that prejudice is isolated incidents and starts acknowledging it as daily weather, always present, shaping lives whether you notice it or not. Healing begins when silence is broken not just by victims, but by those who benefit from the silence. That is why this moment matters, not just because a manager was fired, but because the story forces everyone watching to ask themselves, where am I in the silence? Do I record or do I speak? Do I look away or do I step forward? Am I complicit in keeping the machine humming or am I ready to jam the gears? The answers are not abstract. They are choices, made every day in stores, offices, classrooms, and boardrooms. And here is where I ask you to join me right now. If you believe it's time to stop normalizing humiliation as just the way things are, if you believe silence is no longer acceptable, write in the comments the phrase, break the chains. Write it twice, not once. Because once is a thought, twice is a declaration. Twice makes it real, twice makes it collective, twice makes it impossible for the algorithm to bury. This is how engagement becomes resistance, by turning a video into a movement, a story into a symbol. The slap was loud, but the echo it leaves in our psychology is louder. That echo is either the sound of cycles repeating or the sound of chains breaking. Which one it becomes depends on us. The store became a battlefield, but what we are really witnessing is how institutions themselves are designed to keep inequality alive while pretending to oppose it. When Samantha revealed her identity, the corporate executives moved quickly, their concern unmistakable. But do not be fooled. This wasn't morality waking up, this was liability management. Institutions survive not by preventing injustice, but by controlling its fallout. They let prejudice operate quietly in the aisles for years, then scramble the moment it becomes visible to the public. Their priority is reputation, not reparation. If there had been no phones recording, no viral moment waiting to ignite, the slap would have been handled as an unfortunate incident filed into an HR folder, forgotten except by the woman who carried it in her body. This is the hidden machinery of institutional racism. It allows humiliation to happen daily, so long as it stays invisible. Managers like David are not glitches, they are features. They keep profits flowing by screening out undesirable customers under the guise of efficiency. They enforce invisible velvet ropes without the company ever having to admit that rope exists. When one of them slips and makes the discrimination too obvious, the system sacrifices him like a pawn, preserving the larger game. Justice appears to have been served, but the machine keeps running. Think of how many layers are complicit here. Corporate handbooks preach inclusivity, while sales metrics quietly encourage profiling. Security systems are advertised as neutral technology, but they are placed disproportionately in communities labeled high risk, echoing old red lines on old maps. Executives issue polished statements about diversity, but internally, they know their best-selling image is still the smiling white customer who feels safe in their stores. Racism is not a rogue manager. It is an institutional strategy dressed up as professionalism. And the cruelest manipulation? The way the system convinces its victims to enforce the rules against themselves. Black employees are told they must work twice as hard to be considered half as competent. Women of color are told to dress professionally, which really means erase your culture until it fits our comfort. Associates like Marcus are punished for extending respect to customers who don't look premium, and customers themselves internalize the message, adjusting their clothes, their tone, their very presence to avoid suspicion. When inequality reaches this level, the system no longer has to enforce discrimination. It has trained the oppressed to self-police. Samantha's confrontation with David pulled back the curtain on these manipulations. When he accused her of theft, when he demanded IDs no other customer had to provide, when he mocked her clothing, those weren't improvisations. They were rehearsed behaviors, learned from years of unspoken rules, reinforced by managers before him, tolerated by executives above him. He was doing what the system trained him to do. His downfall does not prove the system failed. It proves the system worked exactly as intended until visibility made it dangerous. This is the brutal truth many avoid. Racism is profitable. Profiling pushes certain shoppers out, keeping premium customers comfortable. Fear sells security systems, insurance policies, and loss prevention consulting packages. Bias justifies underpaying certain neighborhoods while extracting maximum labor from them. Every policy has a price tag attached, and those in power cash in while the targets pay in dignity, opportunity, and safety. That's why institutions resist real change. It would cost them profit. And so the question becomes, how do you dismantle a system that feeds on inequality? The answer starts with exposure. Viral videos puncture the illusion of fairness, forcing institutions to act. But exposure must be followed by transformation, or else it is only spectacle. For every Samantha who reveals her power, there are thousands of people humiliated without cameras, with no executives rushing to their defense. Their pain doesn't trend. Their humiliation isn't met with accountability. The system counts on that invisibility to continue. This is why the story of one store matters far beyond its walls. It is a parable about schools that suspend black students for behaviors white students are forgiven for, about hospitals that dismiss pain in black patients while prescribing aggressively for others, about banks that deny loans in neighborhoods they deem too risky, only to approve the same loan for the same amount in a different zip code. The store is a stage, but the play is America itself. And here's the most chilling part. Institutions present these outcomes as neutral. They hide behind phrases like policy, procedure, data-driven. But look closer at the data. Predictive policing systems disproportionately patrol black neighborhoods because historical data already reflected bias. AI hiring tools filter out ethnic names because past hiring managers did the same. Neutrality becomes nothing more than bias frozen into an algorithm. The machine reproduces inequality with a smile, claiming innocence all the while. Samantha's presence forced the machine to stutter for once. But dismantling it requires more than one CEO's courage. It requires pressure that does not fade when the headlines do. It requires exposing the lie that racism is a series of isolated incidents, when in truth it is a network of practices, profits, and protections. It requires asking not only why did David act this way, but who trained him, who promoted him, who looked away until it was too late. Institutions will always sacrifice individuals when caught, because that keeps the deeper system hidden. But today, we are not looking away. Today, we are mapping the wires and gears, and once you see the machine for what it is, you can never unsee it again. The story spread beyond the glass doors of that store, but what made it viral was not just outrage, it was recognition. People saw their own lives in Samantha's humiliation, and in David's arrogance, they recognized 1,000 faces they had already met. The clip raced across social media within hours. Hashtags trended. News outlets scrambled to turn seconds of shaky phone footage into 20-minute segments. Comment sections swelled with anger and disbelief. But beneath the noise, something deeper pulsed. A collective sigh of recognition. Black mothers wrote about the time they were accused of shoplifting while buying baby formula. Latino fathers shared how they were asked for ID 3 times when trying to open store credit. Asian American students recalled being followed by security guards who whispered, "Just keeping an eye." Millions saw Samantha's slap and thought, "That could have been me. That has been me." Virality, however, is a double-edged weapon. Institutions know how to ride it. Corporations issue polished apologies, hire consultants, and launch campaigns filled with smiling models in diverse shades. The cycle goes: harm, exposure, outrage, rebranding, then back again. This is institutional survival disguised as progress. True accountability would mean restructuring incentives, dismantling biased training, rethinking profit models built on exclusion. That doesn't fit neatly into a press release, so they trade repair for optics. But here's the truth. Institutions cannot control. Once a story resonates, it lives in the public memory long after the news cycle moves on. Samantha's slap became more than content. It became a mirror. Families at dinner tables asked their children what they would do if they saw someone mistreated. Business schools added her story to ethics courses. Activists used the footage in community workshops to show how discrimination doesn't always wear a hood or carry a weapon. It can wear a suit, carry a clipboard, and still strike like a fist. The psychological ripple is powerful. For those long silenced, stories like this offer validation, proof that their experiences were not isolated paranoia, but part of a larger pattern. For those who benefit from privilege, the story forces discomfort, a reminder that the world they move through so easily is hostile terrain for others. Both reactions are necessary. Discomfort is the soil in which empathy grows, and validation is the water that keeps the oppressed from withering into despair. Still, recognition alone is not enough. Outrage without action decays into entertainment. To transform, society must confront the uncomfortable question: why does justice only seem to arrive when victims are revealed to be exceptional? Samantha was a CEO, a woman with wealth and influence. Her power forced accountability. But what of the countless unnamed who are humiliated daily without a camera or a title to protect them? Their pain is just as real, their dignity just as sacred. Yet their stories rarely go viral. This imbalance reveals how inequality is layered, not just in who suffers, but in whose suffering is believed. And then there is the psychological effect on the aggressors. David's face, once smug, now circulates online as a symbol of arrogance exposed. He is disgraced, fired, humiliated, but he is not unique. For every David caught on camera, there are thousands more whose names you will never know, who keep their jobs, their reputations intact, because no phone was raised in time. This is why focusing on villains alone misses the point. Systems create them, protect them, and replace them as soon as one falls. Accountability must move past individuals and begin to dismantle the culture that manufactures Davids by the dozen. At this stage of the story, we are peeling back the final protective layer, the myth that racism is sustained only by bad actors. The truth is far more disturbing. Racism survives because ordinary people, fearing conflict, protecting paychecks, clinging to comfort, choose silence. It survives because institutions profit from it. It survives because algorithms learn it, laws encode it, and culture excuses it. And it survives because society treats each viral moment as an aberration instead of what it really is: another entry in a long, continuous ledger of injustice. So what do we do with this dangerous knowledge? We carry it forward. We refuse to treat Samantha's story as entertainment alone. We use it as evidence, as warning, as instruction. We remind ourselves that if dignity can be stripped from a CEO in her own store, then dignity is fragile for all of us. We acknowledge that racism is not a glitch in the system. It is the system, polished until it looks like professionalism. This is where transformation must begin, with recognition that justice can not only arrive when the victim is powerful, with courage that interrupts silence before it calcifies, with a collective refusal to let outrage fade into apathy. The slap may have ended David's career, but the echo it left demands more than one firing. It demands dismantling the scaffolding that made his arrogance possible. And as you listen now, I ask you again to make this commitment tangible. In the comments, write, "Break the chains," twice, once for Samantha and once for the millions whose names you will never know but whose stories live in every silent pause, every suspicious glance, every humiliation swept under the rug. Twice, because repetition turns words into movement. The store doors have long since closed, but the lesson has not. And whether this story ends as just another viral clip or the seed of transformation depends not on what happened in that aisle, but on what we choose to do with it. Every system hides its true face until a moment like this rips away the mask, and then we are left with a choice: to stare, to forget, or to change. The video of Samantha's confrontation became a firestorm. Politicians weighed in. Activists folded it into campaigns. Executives across industries quietly updated their talking points, eager to be seen on the right side. But while the noise roared online, in quiet corners of the country, something deeper stirred. Conversations that had been postponed for too long. Families at dinner tables confronted uncomfortable truths about how they themselves treated others. Employees whispered in break rooms about the times they had seen similar behavior but stayed silent. Churches, schools, and community groups replayed the footage, not just to condemn David, but to dissect the mechanics of prejudice. For once, a single story managed to pierce the national denial and expose what had always been there. Yet exposure is not resolution. The danger of moments like these is that we mistake visibility for victory. Viral outrage is easy. Systemic repair is slow, unglamorous, and costly. To change, companies must do more than fire one man. They must measure fairness as rigorously as they measure revenue. They must protect whistleblowers instead of silencing them. They must train employees not to profile, but to serve, and then back that training with accountability that cannot be dodged by excuses. Without this, every apology statement is just theater, and every viral video becomes another spectacle consumed and forgotten. The deeper truth is that racism is not only in the store aisles, it is in the architecture of our society. The same reflex that made David call Samantha a thief is the reflex that makes police escalate encounters disproportionately with black citizens. It is the reflex that makes hiring managers word resumes with ethnic names. It is the reflex that pushes banks to deny loans in neighborhoods long marked as undesirable. It is the reflex coded into algorithms that pretend to be objective but inherit yesterday's bias. Unless we uproot this reflex, it will grow back no matter how many managers are fired. For the individuals in that store, the aftermath was transformative. Marcus, promoted for his courage, carried the lesson that truth matters even when it costs you. Jennifer, who lived too long in silence, began to teach others why complicity is poison. Even the guard, trained to profile, came to see that true safety cannot be built on suspicion. But their transformation should not be exceptional. It should be ordinary. A society that requires extraordinary courage just to treat people with dignity is a society still chained. And what of Samantha? Her words, "your store," will echo long after the slap is forgotten. She reminded everyone that dignity cannot be purchased, that leadership is not about appearances, and that power means nothing if it is used to exclude. But she also knew something darker. If she had not been a CEO, if she had been just another woman in a hoodie, the story would not have ended this way. The cameras might still have recorded, but justice would not have come so swiftly. That is the indictment we cannot ignore. So here we are, you and I, at the end of this journey together. You have heard about the silence that protects prejudice, the psychology that wounds both victim and bystander, the institutions that profit from inequality, the stories that confirm this is not new but centuries old. The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? Dangerous truths demand action. Will you be the one who looks away, or the one who interrupts the silence? Will you accept comfort, or will you risk change? If you are still here, still listening, you already know which side you want to be on, and I ask you one final time to mark it. Write, break the chains in the co's moments. Twice. Once for the woman in the hoodie whose dignity was attacked but not erased. And once for the millions who walk into stores, schools, workplaces every day, carrying the weight of suspicion, hoping for dignity, and too often leaving without it. Because chains don't break by themselves. They break when enough hands pull together. They break when silence is replaced with courage, when profit is balanced with principle, when humanity is valued above hierarchy. They break when stories like Samantha's are not treated as anomalies, but as alarms. And they break when you decide that you are not just a viewer, not just a bystander, but part of the struggle to tear the system apart. The slap was one man's downfall. The silence was one store's indictment. But the truth revealed here. This is everyone's responsibility. The mask is off. The choice is yours.